Hi, I am Glendora Lashley. Welcome to the Talk to Tingz mini podcast. Talk to Tingz is part of the ongoing work by the Lilly Foundation for Human Development to combat gender-based abuse and violence in Tobago. This podcast is in partnership with the Coalition Against Domestic Violence in support of the Spotlight Initiative, which is a global partnership between the European Union and the United Nations. The Spotlight Initiative is working in partnership with the government of Trinidad and Tobago. And in this episode of Talk to Tingz, we are chatting with Minister of State in the Office of the Prime Minister with responsibility for gender and child affairs, Ayanna Webster-Roy. Hello, Minister.
Hi, good afternoon, Glendora. Good afternoon to those of you who are listening.
All right, thank you for taking the time out to talk to us on this podcast episode. We're hoping to raise awareness around sexual abuse and violence, and we are specifically looking at the sexual abuse of boys and girls in Tobago. I know that you have been working very, very hard to also raise awareness and eliminate this issue of gender-based violence and abuse in Trinidad and Tobago. And so I'd like to start off by asking you, as a policymaker, what's the current situation with respect to sexual abuse of children nationally and specific to Tobago, if you have that data?
Okay, so I have the information nationally, but I would have extracted this Tobago specific data to share this afternoon because the information I'm sharing is from the 2021 administrative report, which will be laid in Parliament soon. So I'm going to share with you the information for Tobago. So for the fiscal period of 2020-21, that is October 1st to September 30th, 2021, we saw a caseload of 233 reports in Tobago. There was an average of 19 reports a month, and the highest number reported in any 1 month was 25. Now, if we specifically focus on sexual abuse, what the statistics shows is that 26.8% of reports were sexual abuse, and for a small island community as Tobago, I think that number is unacceptable. In terms of the age groups, from 1 to 3 years, we had 33.3% of the reports going to 1 to 3 year old, that is sexual abuse. For 4 to 6 year olds, we had 22.5% of the reports accounting for that age group. The 7 to 9 years age group, that accounted for 15.4% of these reports in Tobago. And for the 10 to 13 age group, we had 30.9% of the reports for sexual abuse going to that age group. So when we look at the 14 to 15 as well as the 16 to 17 year olds, the 14 to 15 year old grouping that had 32.6%, and the 16 to 17 year olds that accounted for 47.7%. From the statistics, Glendora, it shows that in Tobago, and as well as nationally, when it comes to sexual abuse based on reports, the vast majority of reports coming in would be from girls. So in Tobago, 85.7% of the cases of sexual abuse reported to the Children's Authority, those were girls, and 10.7% of the reports were boys.
Wow.
I want to just share some other data, but not just sexual abuse, because for me, when we talk about abuse, and especially in the Tobago context, because of our culture where we think that certain things are just acceptable because we're doing it so all the time. My mommy beat me, I ain't dead, or we are accustomed living China at home alone. But if we take into consideration the Children Act and the different things that we have done over the years to strengthen the child care protection system, we recognize that all forms of abuse, physical abuse, emotional abuse, neglect, sexual abuse, all forms of abuse. When you look at the Tobago context, the population size and reports, we have too many instances of abuse. So for example, For that period I mentioned before, that is 2020 to 2021 fiscal period, we had 26.8% sexual abuse cases reported, 26.4% of neglect cases reported, and 19.1% physical abuse cases reported to the Children's Authority. I mean, for somebody who lives on the island of Tobago, raising 3 children here in this little island community, those numbers, Glendora, they're indeed staggering.
Now, Minister, you raise a very important point in the sense that both of us are here in Tobago. We live here, we've grown up here, and we know the culture of, well, as you say, that's how we just do it all the time. Neglect. Your statistics for neglect has shocked me in terms of the reports are very high. Are you able to give any details in this case? What does neglect mean? Is this specific to leaving children at home by themselves or unsupervised without the presence of an adult? Also, do you have any idea as to the breakdown between the sexes for that neglect?
Okay, so in terms of neglect, it's not just about leaving children at home alone. It's more about not ensuring the proper care and well-being of a child. So it could be having a child left unsupervised for extended periods, children not being fed properly, children going to school and not looking as though they're well taken care of. It's a range of different things that would fall under neglect. But at the end of the day, when you speak about neglect, you know that the child's best interest is in the priority of his or her parent or guardian. So when we talk about neglect in the Tobago context, and when we, especially during the time of COVID, we would have recognized that a number of persons took a chance in terms of leaving little children at home unsupervised to go out to work, or unsupervised to go out to just a line. And we had calls, additional calls coming into the authority. And even outside of COVID before that, I remember campaigning one election period. It wasn't for my election, I think it was a TH election, and in a particular community, almost every house we went to, little children were coming out, but the parents weren't home as yet. When you ask them, okay, so who is supervising you? Oh, we're here by ourselves, so there's no adult. No, we're inside, we're watching TV. I was like, okay, and that troubled me.
Wow.
Because the Tobago we knew long ago, where the village was raising a child, some cousin, some neighbor would cast an eye or go and ensure that the child is safe or the children are safe. You're not really seeing that Tobago still. It might be existing in small pockets, but that kind of close-knit Tobago where the village is raising a child, we don't really have that culture much in Tobago existing. So we have to ensure that we educate our population how to really safeguard children, and to ensure that while we make our children, we recognize that they too are young adults, young people, young little humans with rights, and their rights must be respected, protected, and promoted. So we asked about the, if I could sex disaggregated information in terms of neglect. We saw 50% of that number reported being boys, males, and 47.6% female.
Wow.
So it may seem as though when it comes to the boys, the parents, guardians are being more lax, more free, but a slightly little better supervision, protection, care of the girls in terms of neglect. However, when you flip it over to sexual abuse, you're seeing where an alarming 85.7% of the reports that would be accounted to girls being sexually abused in Tobago.
Now, Minister, that is an interesting bit of statistics. Today is the
International Women's Day.
International Women's Day,
Yes,
and
yeah.
I want to engage you a bit extra with respect to the statistics that you've just presented, because you spoke earlier about the community that Tobago, the community type of communities, the nature where somebody was always home, casting an eye, as they say. There's a discussion, an ongoing discussion that I've been having with several people about that very said thing. Women in Tobago, let's say, have become much more empowered. In the past, a lot of women were at home. I know I could talk about my primary school days, but somebody was home in the sense that nobody would necessarily be alone, at least for any long period of time. It seems to me, and I may be wrong, I don't know what you're seeing, that with the empowerment of the women, the increase in what we call neglect has happened, because previously the men were out being the quote-unquote breadwinners, but now the women are out advancing themselves, taking classes, working more, that kind of thing. Is that something that you are seeing? Do you have a particular perspective on that?
And even though some people may try to equate women becoming more empowered and thus leaving the home, being gainfully employed, pursuing different activities outside of the home, that shouldn't be linked to neglect, because the burden of care shouldn't only be placed on a woman. And if we're talking about a society that is advancing and developing and wanting to achieve a different status, we should talk about the burden of care being shared equally within the household. I understand in some families you may have single parent households, and in that situation, that's where we ask for and we should expect the support system in terms of, persons you could trust in the community, extended family, assisting with the care and protection of children. And I think that is why the Office of the Prime Minister, Gender and Child Affairs Division, we would have made attempts in Tobago, and to some extent successfully done so, to train those duty bearers, so the coaches, the teachers, the persons who work closely with children, so that they themselves could be able to be another layer of support. So for example, if a parent is working and the child is engaged in extracurricular activities, so they know they're going to football on evening, or they're playing netball, tennis, whatever, so that those coaches would understand what child abuse is, understand what is happening in the context of protecting children, so that they could pick up on signs and be able to be first responders to an extent, and assist us in ensuring that all the boys and girls in Tobago are fully protected, so that they grow up to be able to become meaningful contributors to national development and the development of our island of Tobago.
Right. And I want to engage you even a bit further, because when we look at the responsibility of the men, as you said, the men and their role as it relates to child care, child nurturing, and so on, we may have some ways to go. But the last episode that we did, I did it with the inspector in charge of the child protection unit of the TTPS, and he had some very interesting statistics in the sense that when he spoke about the sexual penetration and sexual abuse reported cases, he spoke about 100% being male perpetrators. He went on to talk about further investigation and assessment of the perpetrators showed that for many of them, they were themselves the victim of abuse and violence, many of them sexually as well. And so I asked him, who were abusing these men and boys? Because normally when we talk about sexual abuse, even in the numbers that are reporting, you have said it here, 85.7%, I believe you said, with respect to sexual abuse, the reports came from females, right? Yes. Girl children.
Yes.
Is there an issue where we're not getting the correct reporting of sexual abuse for the men? Have you all been able to look into that area? Well, for boys, have you all been able to look into that area? Is there something that we need to do, to better understand what is happening there? Because from what Inspector Miller said, he said that a lot of these male perpetrators were in fact, reported that they were abused sexually by either their fathers, grandfathers, uncle, some male relative. but we're not necessarily getting this in reporting statistics specific to Tobago.
And I think it goes back to, and I don't think it's a Tobago situation. I think it's a national situation where it is so taboo to discuss sexual violence perpetrated against men and boys. When I remember one time there was a situation on Facebook, and I think the guy was sexually assaulted, and persons were joking like, you calling that rape, it's so easy for us to accept that maybe a girl was molested. But when it comes to boys, I think because we think that we're macho ways, and associating manliness and being a man to your sexual prowess and so on, people don't really take it seriously, but it's something that we must pay attention to, because you mentioned that the inspector said that a number of the men who are perpetrators now said they were abused. So it's like a cycle. And in order to us to break that cycle, we need education and sensitization. We need honest, open discourse for us to ensure that we do not repeat that cycle of abuse within a home or within our community. Growing up in Roxbury countryside, there were certain villages that you just knew. You heard the stories. You see this village? After 12 is lunch. You know what I mean by that.
Mm-hmm.
Or you see this family, the father is the grandfather, it's confusing things like that. There was this acceptance. But what I've recognized, the fact that we have been educating people, putting information out there, empowering our children, people are being more brave and they're being able to speak out more. So, for example, the Child Rights Ambassadors program, through that program, the children, we train them up to be child rights ambassadors, and they go out and educate their community, the school, their peers. And because they have that information, they're sharing it so freely and doing an excellent job, more young people know what to do and how to report.
Right.
So you see in the numbers there would reflecting on that empowerment. But it is critical for us to be honest and open with our discourse around abuse and sexual abuse in Tobago. I remember when I just became minister, I think it was in 2016, I gave a speech, and sometimes I get very emotional, and I put down my people and I started to talk from my heart. And I remember somebody called me after and said, you know what, why you had to talk it like that? And that was on national TV, and it made Tobago sound bad, but the data, that was the reality. And for me, as a mother with young children in Tobago, I felt it, because even though my children may be safe, they're interacting with other persons, not only in school, but they might go to the movies, they might go to the mall, they might go to the library. Right. And you interact with other persons, and there's a saying, hurt people hurt people. So if you want to ensure that we all live a life that is free from violence, then we have to ensure that we protect those who are most vulnerable while educating each other, so we understand how important it is to respect people's rights, the right to live a life free from violence, the right to be able, as a child, to be able to grow and learn without being fearful of their body being abused, or without being fearful of being neglected, or without being fearful of being emotionally abused, because that is another issue in Tobago. If you look at the statistic, emotional abuse is pretty high as well.
Yeah, as you were saying, as you were talking there, I was thinking back to a situation that I had a few years ago. I went to a school to do some training, like a workshop session with the girls, right? All centered around combating gender-based abuse and violence. And I remember one particular girl, very unassuming, but of course, when you're doing this work long enough, you're trained to see certain signs. So she came to me afterwards, and she was like, Miss, my father does trouble me, almost every night. But I just waiting to do CXC and go university. And that girl was in lower secondary school. And I remember thinking to myself, can you imagine that a teenager has to kind of sit down and say to themselves, I am waiting for 3 to 5 more years to be able to leave home to be free. And I'm saying that to bring it to the point where you talk about, you know, people asking you, well, why you have to say it so? Because there's an issue with adult females, especially, who seem to believe that because they were victims of sexual abuse growing up, that their children and other young people that they have to look after or that they have to be responsible for, they seem to think, well, listen, you're going to grow out of it, or it's a matter of time you're going to end. What do you say? What do you have to say? Or maybe what initiatives? I know you've been working very hard to put all sorts of things in place. How do we respond to that in Tobago? Because that is a real crisis.
Glenda, one of the first things I want to mention is the Children's Authority. Now, prior to 2015, we didn't have a Children's Authority. So that was one of the first things that would have been done to help to strengthen the child care and protection system. Before 2015, you may have to make a report to the police and hope it would get investigated. But now with the Children's Authority, with a dedicated hotline, children, adults know who to contact. And I just want to share the numbers now. It is 996 or 800-2014. Those numbers are toll-free. They operate 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So people can reach out to the Children's Authority for that intervention. And the Children's Authority, they have what we call an emergency response team. So if a child is in imminent danger, or the authority would activate the emergency response protocol and enter into that community to safeguard that child. Additionally, for those children who would have been removed from their home because of abuse or for any matter, and they end up in the care of the state, the Office of the Prime Minister would have introduced what we call the payment per child system to help to offset the cost of caring for those children, so that while they're in the care of the state, we ensure that their psychosocial needs are met. So if they need counseling, they receive counseling, because at the end of the day, the vision is to ensure that that child will grow up into an adult who would have been able to heal with the right intervention and therapy, so that they themselves will not go on to perpetrate, and they're better able to integrate into society as an adult, having learned the techniques to cope with the hurt and the pain of their past trauma.
Okay, so, Minister, could you repeat what's the name of the system you said?
The payment per child system. So that's where we support those children who are in our community residence and homes, those who end up in care of the state. And that is where we provide the funding for their psychosocial needs. So not just food. Long ago, people put a child in a home and they think it's just their clothes and their food. It's not that. We go beyond that. We ensure that if they need therapy, they will receive the therapy. If they need intervention in terms of bringing them up at the educational level up, because they might have been not performing well at school because of the abuse, they get this special attention in terms of the academics. So it's a whole range of services that we would provide for those children who end up in the care of the state, to ensure that, as I said before, that they heal from the past trauma and emerge better from the situations, that they don't go on to be perpetrators. We are now rolling out and implementing our national child policy, and it's the first for Trinidad and Tobago. And the policy provides, identifies a national strategies for us to respond to child abuse, and it also identifies the various roles for government organizations to play. Additionally, we also working with the Children's Authority as well as other agencies to develop a national child abuse protocol. So how do we treat with abuse, and the proper protocol, so every agency would know what to do and how to do it as well, Glendora. But I think one of the key messages I want to send is for individuals, regardless of age, to accept a zero tolerance approach to abuse. We need a change in mindset. We could no longer say, oh, well, I went through it and nothing happened to me, or we are accustomed to that, that is just a normal thing, or that is a norm for this village, yeah. We have to change our mindset or attitude towards abuse in Tobago.
You know, Minister, the first episode of this, it was done with the Secretary with responsibility for health, wellness and social protection in the THA, Dr. Faith B. Israel. And she actually suggested something that you, I think, brought to Trinidad and Tobago and have been championing as a way to assist us in Tobago. And that was considering foster care and adoption specifically. When I asked her about, some of the things that we can do, she actually pointed to that, and I said, well, that's a good thing to hear you say that, because this is a national policy that you, Minister, you have put forward. How has the response been by Tobagonians with respect to considering adoption? I know even for me, I was saying to her, my daughter is 8 years old, and she asked me, she just came up and said, well, Mommy, where's the adoption center? I said, what? Because she wants a sibling, and we have the ongoing conversation, but we're not on the same page. So she said to me, seeing that you're not going to make a baby, can we adopt a baby? And it forced me to think about it. You're laughing at a serious thing. It really forced me as a Tobagonian, I ain't lying to you, because I started thinking, do I have the resources, for that? Would it be the same thing? I don't know. All sorts of things were going through my mind. How has the response been with respect to, since you started, this conversation nationally and in Tobago? What are Tobagonians saying to you?
Okay, so there's a fundamental difference between foster care and adoption. When you adopt a child, that child is yours. You're fully responsible for that child's care and well-being. So it's as though you gave birth to that child, so everything is up to you. Foster care, on the other hand, is where you provide a space, a safe space for a child. So you accept a child into your home, and you welcome that child as if that child is your own. However, you receive some financial support from the state to assist you with caring for that child. Foster care could be short-term, or foster care in some instances when we don't find a fit person, for example, a family member who will be willing to take that child in, maybe longer term. But I must say, quite a few persons in Tobago have indicated an interest in adopting. Most people want to adopt a baby, but how many babies might be available for adoption? So I always encourage people, if you seriously want to open up your heart and home to a child, and you're willing to take a child in the teens, consider, because every child, regardless of age, every child deserves to be in a loving, stable home, a home free from violence. So if you consider an adoption and you haven't yet made up your mind if you want to have a baby, or if you want an older child, maybe a toddler, a preteen or a teen, I would encourage you to work with the Children's Authority, contact them, register. And if an option comes up for a teenage boy or girl, please give them an opportunity to become part of your family. Right. In terms of foster care, the authority, but both foster care and adoption, first the Children's Authority will do the necessary assessment to ensure that you, your family, that you're suitable. And in making decision, I want to stress, because this is important, in making decision, the authority will always act in the best interest of the child, because sometimes people call me, and I had a call recently. I was in Trinidad, at the office in Trinidad, and the person was really upset. They were taking care of, I think, two or three children. They were fostering them, and one child was adopted by another family, and that foster parent was upset because she wanted. I said, but no, did you register to be an adoptive parent? I said, if you register for foster care, then that will be the process. They will look at you as for fostering a child. But I said, if somebody registered to be an adoptive parent, they want a child. And if that child is available because the parents already renounced their rights and the child is available, I said, why should you deny that child the opportunity of going to a loving home if you did not register your interest to adopt? And I had to explain over and over until she said, you know what, I now get what you're coming from. She said, but what was hard for her was the fact that all the children were building a relationship. So I said, it is your duty to explain to them what foster care is, what right. the nature of the relationship that they're going to be having with each other. I said, in some instances, they may be together where just maybe because of some fluke or things in the work, or they may stay with you until they turn 18, which is the age of adulthood in Trinidad and Tobago, and they will age out of the systems, and they may decide at that age that they want to maintain a relationship and keep in contact. I said, however, there is no obligation for that person, that parent who adopted that child, to keep in contact with you or the other children in the home, because some adoptions would be closed. You understand? I'm saying, Glendora, and I had to explain. So I want people to understand the difference between foster care and adoption. That's one. Two, I want people to appreciate how important it is, if you're considering adoption, to also consider adopting an older child. And three, if you have the extra space, if you have the willingness to, your heart big enough, your home big enough, your support system is strong enough, and you're willing to go through the process to be registered as a foster parent or foster carer in Tobago, please do so. I think it's always better for children to be in loving homes instead of being in institutions, regardless of what we may put in place so that our institutions could be as homely as possible. It is better to be in a home setting than to be in an institution.
Right. Minister, with respect to some of the older children, or even maybe younger ones who have had perhaps a really bad experience and they are up for adoption or to be placed in foster care. I know you spoke with the foster care, there's some support. Is there a working support where for those children who may need, let's say, ongoing psychosocial work, counseling, therapy, that kind of thing? Is there that sort of support for adoptive parents or foster carers in terms of, in the event that the children that are now placed in their care may need that?
Okay, so remember, when you adopt a child is yours legally in every sense of the word, right? So you're responsible for that child's care and well-being. And when I say the care and well-being, if that child needs counseling, you have to make the arrangements for that, because that is your child.
Right.
If a child is with a foster parent, and I'm using the word loosely when I say foster parent, if a child is in foster care, then that additional support is guaranteed.
Okay.
The children, what happened for those children who come into contact with the Children's Authority and they're in care? So if they're with a foster parent, or if you want for homes or whatever, they're supposed to have individualized care plans that would identify the different needs, and those needs should be met. So I mentioned previously the payment per child system. Apart from this standard figure for the different age groups, there's an additional $2,000 that is made available to a child for them to access any kind of emergency intervention. So any specialized medical care, or if any additional type of counseling or therapy is required that is not available through the state system, that's an additional $2,000 per child that is made available for that purpose.
Okay, all right. Well, yeah, there's some support, and I suppose the main thing is for those people, those responsible adults that are interested in either adoption or foster care, contact the Children's Authority and have the sit-down consultation where all of this will be explained, yeah?
Yes, yeah.
All right, so before
and I want to stress it again, when you adopt a child, because some people mix up adoption and foster. When you adopt a child, you are fully responsible for that child. The only difference is that you didn't push the child out if you're a lady. You understand? Or you didn't contribute the sperm if you're a man. When you adopt a child is yours. You're fully responsible for that child.
That's something.
So that is why the process with adoption may take some time, because they will work with you, they will assess you, then they will see best fit. And I remember I said at the end of the day, they would always act in the best interest of the child. So you might say, well, okay, XYZ child, or somebody talk to me about XYZ child, and you might want XYZ child, because I've had that situation where somebody called me, well, this person down the road and the permanent one I want, doesn't work like that. The authority will do the necessary assessment and make a judgment call. The adoption board is a special adoption committee on the board of the Children's Authority. They would do their work, and they would, in collaboration with the team at the operational arm of the authority, would make a decision on where a child would be placed in terms of adoption. If it is that your sister might have died or brother might have died, and you want to adopt the child because the father isn't around or whatever, then that process could happen as well.
Okay, this is so those people again, to get more information, the first step is really to call the Children's Authority.
Yes.
Right. So a call to the Children's Authority, because I think that this is an important option for Tobagonians. Yes. Because of the fact that we are not a place where we have a whole bunch of orphanages, you know, that kind of thing. Also, the nature of the island, you know, the way we are culturally, it may be one of the better options for us. And of course, with respect to acting in the best interest of the child, the Children's Authority assesses the potential adult in the case, to make sure that they are fit for the responsibility that they want to assume. Yes?
Definitely.
All right. Just quickly before we wrap, Minister, with respect to some of the statistics that you presented, I want to go back a bit. I know you had mentioned a particular area while campaigning. Do you have any information in terms of what the reports are like throughout Tobago? Is there, and I don't really want to stereotype any particular area, but are there any trends that have emerged that we should be aware of as Tobagonians?
So I will give you the data that I have, and it will be according to parishes. And as I said before, this will be for fiscal 2020-2021. So for St. John, and this is for all types of abuse, the cumulative figure, right? So St. John, the number of reports, 1.7% of the reports, right? St. Paul, accounting for 6% of the reports. St. Mary, 7.3%. St. George, 24%. St. Andrews will include Scarborough and environs as well. That accounted for 27.9% of the reports. St. David accounted for 15.9% of the reports. And St. Patrick accounted for 17.2% of reports. And as I would have indicated earlier, the total number of reports for that period, we had 233.
Now, Minister, you put me in a jam there like the Registrar General's office. As a Mariah girl, I believe St. David includes Mariah. I believe St. Patrick is down Crown Point side because that's on one of the church and them that is beyond the road. And when you mentioned St. Andrew, including Scarborough, so I make a judgment call there. But Minister, who Tobago did you know?
and that is how the information is presented in the report.
So we're going to challenge you, Minister, as our representative for one of the constituencies in Tobago, to tell the people responsible for collating this information that specific to Tobago, we're gonna need some awareness as to, you know, what these things, where these parishes are, and who live there.
Then you know what is funny? You know, when we were in primary school, they taught us what villages would have been in it, but I would have done that in standard 5.
Listen, well,
I just can't remember.
Yes, I don't know. You know, I had to laugh because I went to the Registrar General's office as an aside, and I remember they kept asking me to put in some kind of district, was Leeward district, something district, and then the guy said, which district you're from? Windward? I said, Windward is up in the east, I'm not from Windward. And then he came with a different thing, and I had to ask him, you know, how will I arrive at that? I said, Tobagonians know what these things mean. All the Tobagonians may be very aware. Like I said, I know St. David should include Mariah because that's where I'm from, and maybe somebody much older than me spoke about that. And I know St. Patrick because I think it's on one of the churches just on the road there. But, you know, that's as an aside, something that we can learn. It's very, very unfortunate that we still have these high instances of child sexual abuse and other forms of abuse and violence against children in Trinidad and Tobago. Kudos to you, since assuming the role of minister in the Office of the Prime Minister with responsibility for Gender and Child Affairs. I know that many Tobagonians, I don't think it's me alone, we took note of all of the efforts that you have put in. I know that perhaps many of us may not have understood the real importance of your role, especially seeing that you had to be based in Trinidad for a while, and then, you know, you're going in between. But I feel like you've been able to make some headway with respect to the information. And I do hope that for the rest of the time that you're in this position, that you can continue to, you know, effect the desired change, but more so some sort of sustained education and awareness program in Tobago. We at the Lily Foundation for Human Development, we are doing a very small part. There's several other organizations who are doing, you know, their work, but it's really never enough. And I'm sure that many of us come and ask you for funding all the time because you need the resources, you know, but it's important. And as you highlighted before, Minister, because of the societal nuances, you know, how we view things in Tobago, as a politician, people may try to come at you in a different way, but I suppose whenever you decide to come back to normal life, the conversations will continue, you know, and that's the point of this podcast episode, to really raise the awareness specific to Tobago. As we close, is there any other thing that you would like to leave with Tobagonians who will happen upon this podcast and listen? I
want to encourage Tobagonians to just take our child abuse quick course, just so you understand a little bit more about the issue and know how you can be an agent of change, right? So you can visit our website, opm-gca.gov.tt, and look up our quick course and participate. Additionally, I want us to, as Tobagonians, to commit to changing the conversation and being brave enough and bold enough to start conversations that may make people uncomfortable but force change. And I want to encourage our boys and girls to continue to speak up and speak out, that there are some persons who are listening and who will be willing to go beyond the call of duty to ensure that you are safe and you are protected. And I just want to take this opportunity just on the eve of International Women's Day to just convey my regards to all women in Tobago, and for us to remember that we are indeed a critical, crucial, vital, important part of the process towards achieving the Sustainable Development Goals and transforming our space.
Lovely. Thank you very much, Minister. That's how we're going to leave it. Really, really appreciate you taking the time out to have this conversation, and hopefully we will have positive impact and some sort of sustained positive impact on the lives of fellow Tobagonians.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.